Yo, yo, welcome to the Story Studio podcast. I guess I'm
What
making it kind of hip now. So we want to talk about adaptations and specifically like how, how would you frame this, Sean? Because we want to do adaptations, but like kind of what works and what doesn't. Not because we think people are going to be doing an adaptation, but because the way that they're done says a lot about story and choices within a story.
Well, right. It's not just choices within a story. It's like understanding what makes something popular or commercial, especially current adaptations. So if you look at adaptations back in the 80s, say, I mean, let's start with It, which is a really good example. Because I know that some people have a fondness for the It adaptation.
Those people should watch it again.
The ABC show?
I am not one of those people. I thought it was terrible at the time. And even though it came out in the 80s and I was a kid, I'd already read the book. So I was like informed.
I think those people just like Tim Curry a lot and they want another Rocky Horror.
He was a terrible Pennywise. And he was the best thing about that show.
Who should play the terrifying clown? I know, Tim Curry. I'm trying to imagine that in a
sweet trend.
It's just stunt casting and just terrible. So, but if you look at the modern one, while not a perfect adaptation,
they have John Ritter in it.
Yes, he played Ben.
Okay, another interesting choice.
Yeah, that's when he was like, "Look, I could grow a beard. I'm not just Jack Tripper." Like it was not good.
They should have put Mr. Roper in it
as Pennywise
or Mr. Farley. Actually, that's better. The Don Knotts.
It also had I forget his name. He was the dude from Night Court, and he played Dave Barry. Harry Anderson.
Oh yeah. Another weird choice. Let's not put any serious actors. Only comic actors in there.
He was Richie Trashmouth Tozier. That actually worked for me, him. But yeah, whatever. Like it was not good. It was. But the new one, it really is going into what makes things popular. So if you look at the sign of the times, the 80s version of it did fit the time. The new version of it really does fit the times. And if you look at something like Gunslinger or The Dark Tower, I think we did a whole show on why that
didn't fit anything.
Right. Well,
it fits somebody's budget and nothing else.
Exactly. That's a good example of, hey, we have this IP. We should do something with it.
Did they go over budget?
No, I don't think it did go over budget. I think it was one of those things where they had to use up the license before it was out of their hands and like the option expired. And so they just, we'll make a terrible movie because that's better than making no movie at all.
How can we tell 2 million words worth of story in 90 minutes? I know.
Right. So there's a lot of issues with that I just really, really hate. And I think King, I don't want to, or not at least this time, but we could do a whole episode of just King adaptations because those are all over the map too.
I think that King should not be allowed near his own adaptations. I think he's wonderful in prose. I think he translates horribly to video. I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, but that's everything I've seen because he did that TV miniseries format. For all sorts of things like The Stand, the original was done that way.
Yeah, but that was the 80s. It was like that's what they did is all those.
Well, but it wasn't just the format. It was like there's something about his aesthetic for me anyway that works really well in prose. That small town, like the characters that he.
Well, because you can't get into people's heads.
Yeah.
So
when he tries to translate them, but without that backstory inside people's heads, it's like it just doesn't work for me. So, I know this is kind of a mixed bag. It's just the first one that came to me. But if you compare Stephen King's The Shining to Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, they're very different movies. Sean, I think you're an outlier on this. But Kubrick's is so much better for me. But there are other examples of King movies that have been done. Like Stephen King. Okay, so Stephen King was behind Maximum Overdrive. That was a winner. Do you remember Maximum Overdrive with Emilio Estevez at the truck stop?
I actually never saw it. I really wanted to. I thought the trailer was awesome, but I heard how terrible it was, and my parents went to go see it and told me how terrible it was.
Where were you going? Because you started talking about King, and then I kind of interrupted you with that.
Well, I just think King himself is a really good study because is it people who really understand him, and I think that you just hit it. It's not King. King is so misclassified a lot of times because he's just referred to as a genre writer or horror writer, but there's so much more to him than that. And it really is about, and in fact, in Haley's English class a couple of weeks ago, they had a response prompt essay that they had to write. And it was in response to this guy. He was the 72-year-old Yale professor who was talking about the death of literature in America. And he was just really incensed that Stephen King had just won some kind of award for like lifetime achievement, something like that. And,
literature should only be obtuse.
Yes, yeah, and he said some really ridiculous things in this article, including he'd rather children didn't read than reading Harry Potter.
I'll bet that guy doesn't like indie publishers.
No, I'm sure he doesn't.
Or fun.
So, yeah, he was just a real dickbag, and Haley wrote like 5 times the amount that she was supposed to as a response. She just really got going, and I mean, Stephen King really does have a unique gift to make us believe his characters, even if we don't believe the situations or we think the endings are terrible. And so when he pairs down, I mean, some of the best movies ever made are Stephen King, works. Stand By Me was the short story of The Body. Obviously, The Green Mile, which was hugely influential in some of the stuff.
Shawshank Redemption.
Shawshank is going to be on. Yeah, Shawshank is going to be on any top 100 list you've ever seen, and that's Stephen King. It's not scary, but it
King
is about.
Didn't adapt it himself to the
right. Well,
point.
he should never be anywhere near his adaptation. Sure.
Right, exactly. So what do you think makes for a good, I mean, here, I'm going to answer my own question first, but then I'll open the floor because I just want to say this and I don't want to forget it. I think that the cardinal rule to making a good adaptation, whether you make it or not, like understanding the choices made, is that I think you need to divorce from the idea of the source material as a literal interpretation, and understand that it is you have to basically, I think that they look at the intention of the source material and then step back, detach from it, and say, okay, now how do we make this thing in this new
format? All right, you actually have something. Okay, so a little background here. Johnny and I have been talking a lot about adaptations and like our work specifically. We just got back from a 4-day trip to LA where we were pitching for this exact reason. And we actually have a property. We haven't discussed this, so I'm not sure if you want to talk about it, Johnny, because it's a little bit close. But there is a property that has a screenplay written where they had to make choices to change things that Johnny had written.
Oh no, we've talked about this.
Was it Decoy Wallet?
Yeah, no, I can mention this. I can definitely mention the. I don't want to talk about specifics because I don't know what the rules are, but it's for Fat Vampire. We've talked about this before. There's a pilot and a first episode written, and I finally get to read those. And it's really, really interesting to read something that I created and that somebody else reimagined. And I could see a lot of writers. So he changed one character dramatically.
Like pretty much everything about him.
Yeah, I mean everything. Like everything. This is a totally different character other than his function within the plot. He added a character he took some liberties, and the style is different. Like the style feels just a little different from what I did, but in the same vein. And I could see a lot of writers being kind of fussy about that and being maybe a little precious and like, oh, well, you can't change that character. It's really, I mean, I did double take when he told me, because he told me over lunch. And I kind of went, well, but that throws off a whole bunch of stuff. And it didn't matter, though, because this is a totally separate medium. But my point is that when I actually read it, I'm like smiling and nodding. I'm like, this is really, really cool. First of all, it's a really cool experience to see somebody's adaptation of something that we did. But also, I understand that it's totally different and it's its own medium. And I appreciate that he took it in those directions, even though they're not the directions I took it in. I actually thought you were going to talk about some of the things that we were talking about for the structure of Invasion, some of the things that we realized. And I think we can talk about this because it's not in development specifically.
I think we could totally talk about this. Yeah, actually, no, I was talking about the Fat Vampire stuff because I thought that was pretty interesting. You actually had somebody who I mean, that's our first-hand account. So with Invasion, at least as of right now, we're talking about making some of those changes ourselves, or at least, you know, understanding those changes so we could pitch it effectively. Where with Fat Vampire, that's kind of already in the process, and somebody had to respond to what you had written and adapt it. And
yeah, to be clear, I didn't have any hand in writing that at all. It was somebody else.
Yeah, but yeah, let's go ahead and talk about Invasion.
Well, I mean, so if you haven't read, I mean, there's going to be some spoilers for the Invasion series. I don't think they're going to be big ones, and you may not care. I don't think those kind of spoilers that are a problem. But the first book of Invasion actually doesn't have any aliens in it. The ships show up at the end. Dave laughs every time.
Take a shot if you didn't know that.
So the ships arrive at the end. And then book 2, the ships are around, but we still don't see any aliens until the end of book 2.
What's the second book called?
Contact. So there's
no contact.
So each of these things happens in the last few pages. You get an invasion at the end of Invasion. You get contact.
Basically just read the last chapter of each book and you'll be good to go.
That's a true story.
I still argue that it works, in my opinion, quite well in the books. And
I agree. I love what we do in the books, but I also understand that TV is a different.
Right, and that's kind of the whole point, is that something can work in one medium, but it needs to evolve to work in a different medium. And that's sort of what we're realizing here is, and we've been told by several people, look, guys, you have to have aliens in the pilot. You just have to. I just finished watching Colony, which got canceled after 2 seasons, I think. And it was a cool show and it had a lot of tension, but I got really annoyed that the damn aliens didn't show up. And they don't show up until the middle of the second season. Like, it's really long before you even figure out who the hell these aliens are, outside of their like exosuits, which you don't even see them until the end of the first season.
And people gave up on it.
And so that it's kind of a rule. You can't, we were talking to somebody and he had something with like it had a mob element. He's like, you got to have the mob guy in the pilot. Like, you have to set up these hooks right away. And that's the sort of thing that, anyway, long story short, we realize we need to have aliens in the pilot. We need to get to the punch of what the show is really about rather than taking our time.
That's not really an artistic choice that we get to make. And here's the thing about adaptation. I think this is the bottom line, is that when you're adapting something, or when somebody is adapting something that you have, like if you're fortunate enough to get an adaptation, then you have to acknowledge that the person who is adapting that, it's going into another medium. So maybe they're updating your story. Maybe it's going to be a podcast, an audio drama. Maybe it's
and they're probably going to be better at it than you are.
Right. And I think that this is, to Johnny's point, you know, don't let Stephen King be anywhere near his adaptations. It's because he thinks that he understands the story because he wrote it, which is true. He does understand the story because he wrote it. That doesn't mean he understands the medium that it's going to be taken to. And so we get precious on the stories that we have told, but like we've gone every single time Johnny and I have ever had a meeting with anybody about adapting our work, it's always been, yeah, do what you need to do. And I think the Fat Vampire guys were a little suspicious because I don't think they're used to hearing that. And they kept, I think, thinking that eventually we're going to have a problem with this, you know, but.
Yeah,
but
he told me on the phone that it may change a little bit. This was beforehand. And when I was like, I don't care, like, it just make it awesome. It doesn't need to be awesome in the specific way that I envisioned it. And I think
needs to be awesome.
He was so relieved. He was like, oh, wow, you know, some authors will have bitched me out in the past. And then, yeah, I think when we had lunch with them last week, it was like there was an element of, okay, I'm just being a little guarded. Like, they were very fun, but it was, I'm going to announce something and maybe you're not going to like it. And I don't have a problem with it at all. So to circle back on the invasion thing, I think we like this idea, Sean, I'm not sure, because we started with the idea of foreshadowing alien encounters and the fact that this has happened again and again in flashbacks, and pointing to Meyer Dempsey's connection to the aliens through various means. But I pitched, and I think we like this, that as we pitch this more and more, I think we're going to start kind of inching the alien invasion back. I more and more like the idea of the aliens. Now, again, for the TV adaptation, not for the books, we're not going to change the books. The aliens maybe arrive at the midpoint of the pilot, which would be the midpoint of book 1 if we were to translate it backwards. And then for the second half of the book, instead of fighting the ticking clock of the aliens are going to come, they can actually be running from alien ships. And it doesn't have to change anything else, doesn't have to change what happens in the end, but we would be able to see aliens on the ground, we'd see ships coming, it would have all those big set pieces because that's what that medium demands.
I think when we look at adaptation, we have to look at it like collaboration, where
yes,
you are working with somebody that in best circumstances is going to tell your story, but tell it in a different way, and it's no longer just your story, it's a shared story. And when it's done well, it not only brings attention to you as a writer and your original book, but also you're brought to a whole new audience that gets to see your stuff. And like I said, done well. Like The Walking Dead is a good and bad example of adaptation. They deviated from the comics, and in some cases, I think Robert Kirkman, he wrote these things in the comics, and then he had a chance to think about it. He's like, well, I wish I'd done that a little different.
Okay, wait, Dave, let's stick with The Walking Dead for a second. What do you think is the show creator, or I guess the show runner, people who are involved in the show, what do you think that their allegiance is to the source material versus satisfying, or not even the source material, but the integrity of the show, their vision versus what the fans are asking for? Because I think The Walking Dead kind of had to play both of those.
I think I honestly, and I don't remember the example. I know I've written about it before. I feel there was some network interference at some point that dictated some changes.
What kind of changes too?
See, I can't remember. Damn, I wish I did. Basically, I think the story is at its best when it takes its time and develops characters nicely. And sometimes there would be, it would just be very action heavy for the sake of action. Like they were trying to satisfy the minority of people that bitched and moaned that it was a soap opera. And then they just kind of gave the character work short shrift. But there's a lot of people that complain, and rightly so, that they fucked up a lot of the characters. So it's kind of a case where it became so huge, and that it's sort of like a return on investment. The board always wants to see more money. So if a video game does well, the next video game has to do even better, regardless of how that happens. And you begin to kind of screw up the thing that was working well because you're trying to appease the corporate masters. But I feel like when the good things that The Walking Dead has done well, I think like they've introduced characters like Daryl that's not even in the comics, and Carol is
wait, Daryl wasn't in the comics?
No.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And Carol is a much stronger character than in the comics, and I think it's a situation where done right, it works. But there's also things Walking Dead has gotten wrong, so it's good and bad examples in there, and yeah. But one thing I did want to talk about today, and I don't want to spoil anything, and I'm not going to because you guys haven't seen it, and it's relatively new. Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, done by Mike.
Some background here. So Dave said this last night. He's like, "You guys got to watch this," and so Johnny says, "Well, I don't know. Can I really watch it?" But is that
no? I want to watch it.
Watch alone.
Yeah, right. Because everybody's so curious about this, I'll just say what I mean here is when I have to fit. I have the same sort of TV routine as Sean does. Like it's one show a night or two shows a night, and so I can get through things. Like that's nice. I can just roll with it. But if Robin won't watch them with me, then I need to hollow out some other time to watch it. And that's what I was saying is I don't know. And Dave's like, well, I think she'll like it. I'm like, it's called The Haunting of Hill House. That is the opposite of the kind of things that she likes.
So it's based on Shirley Jackson novel, and I believe there was a movie about it before, but it is an adaptation. And Mike Flanagan did it. He did Gerald's Game for Netflix. He did a movie Hush.
The Gerald's Game is it's a movie. It's not.
Yes, it's a movie. And this guy does character work so fucking good. And I'll get to this in a moment. But basically, he's taken a haunted house sort of story, and it's hard to really do anything new with a haunted house. But the way he plays with timelines, and it goes back and forth between kids and adult version, like something happened at this house, and the way the episodes break down, it sort of it focuses on one character per episode in the first ones anyway. I haven't finished the series yet, but I'm sure it's going to deliver. But it focuses on the characters, and you're kind of just thrown into it in the first episode. And the first episode really I didn't connect with yet, because like everything was just kind of happening, and I liked it, but I didn't love it. But then as each episode unfolds, it's like an onion, and you start to learn why this character did this thing. Is all these pieces of a puzzle coming together to tell this story, and they do it in such an intelligent way. I don't think I've seen it done this well ever on television before. It's just so phenomenal, and they're telling a haunted house story, but the characters are what just makes it absolutely amazing. And like, I didn't read the book, but I can't imagine a book is anywhere near this good. And
well,
I'm
they
sure
have so much more time to like tell their story, right?
yes. But and here's the part where Johnny might like this. After you see this and you see how good this guy is, maybe go watch Gerald's Game and Hush, because those were also very good. He's a writer, director, editor, and he did Oculus. I mean, he's done a lot of good stuff.
Why would I like that? Is because I said that the book Gerald's Game was a piece of shit.
No.
Okay.
You're going to like it because he's going to tackle next. The thing he's doing next is Dr. Sleep.
Oh, well, maybe he can turn that piece of shit around too.
Right. And if anybody can do it, he can. Because this guy just understands characters on next level. I mean,
Dr. Sleep was
so
the
damn
rare
good.
book that ruined the one before it. It's like, hey, remember that great book that you wrote, Stephen King? Let's shit all over it.
You know, it's funny because since you said that,
That's like an ending to a series.
I've had people contact me and say, like, completely unrelated, and say how damn good Dr. Sleep is. So now
I
I'm
fucking hated it. I thought it was the stupidest thing ever, but I reserve the right to be wrong.
Yeah.
Well, okay, Johnny, what did you hate about it? Was it that it
Without spoiling?
well, right, okay. Would you have hated it so much if it wasn't related to The Shining, which is one of your favorites?
I don't think I would have hated it as much, because then it wouldn't have been a middle finger. Like I felt like it was, but I also didn't like it. Like the story, I don't know if that makes any sense. So basically, I didn't like the story. But then when you suddenly say, "Oh, okay, we're tying it to The Shining," which was really, really good as a book. By the way, did you ever read that? Either of you read The Shining?
The Shining?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I've read The Shining 2 or 3 times.
Oh, okay. I thought you hadn't.
I've not read it. I bought it to read it just so I could get to Dr. Sleep, because I do have that.
Okay. Well, it's a really good book.
I know it came out in the 70s, right?
Yeah, I know. I saw the movie though. I don't like to read a book after I've seen a movie, because
The adaptation is nothing. I mean, it's
not.
a guy in a hotel, but other than
Right.
that, it's not the same book at all.
Not even.
That story, which is another good example. So I want to come back to this, but Kubrick's Shining is very much Kubrick's Shining. It's not King's Shining at all. Anyway, but yes, I thought the story was kind of blah and uninteresting, but then when you tied it to The Shining, then it actively made me hate it. So what makes for a good adaptation? Just the fact that it's taking. Okay, so let me give you another bad example, because I think that taking the spirit of a project and then twisting it and making something new is kind of what a good adaptation is, but it can also go horribly wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the one that I was going to mention, I think I've mentioned it before, is World War Z, which is just like they just bought an idea. Oh, okay. So there was a zombie war. End of sentence. Full stop. Let's pay no more attention to the source material other than that. And so I don't actually remember whether World War Z was a good story. I remember being just very, very vanilla and uninteresting. Like
the book or the movie?
The book was great.
The movie was It was just a little why bother.
I kind of liked the movie. I mean, for a popcorn movie, I went in with low expectations.
It was popcorn. I remember
that's
so
the
good. I went in with
scenes.
high.
The scenes of the zombies like running as this massive horde are pretty damn close to every nightmare I've ever had.
Have you ever? I realize that I'm violating what I just said about taking the spirit, but have you read World War Z?
No. The idea of World War Z as a book did not interest me at all, and I know that's weird. A lot of people. Yeah, I know.
It's fascinating.
I know a lot of people love it, but to me, I didn't. The idea just seemed.
It's one of the best books that I've read. I really, really liked World War Z. I think I read it twice because it's
You're
an
such
oral.
a strange fellow.
Yeah, it's an oral history, and it's told through these different snippets of these different areas of the world. And so, like what we did with Dead City was just in one little city, but we had to focus in one little area. This is like the scope of the entire world, telling what we always forget that, like all these different areas where things happen, and you start to think like there's this whole thing on how hard it was to fight the zombies, things you couldn't fit into a movie because they don't feel fear. So normally when you're fighting an army, there's some element of if you shoot enough of them, then they're going to back off or something. But the zombies don't give a shit. Like you knock down the ones in front of them, they keep coming. They're like honey badger. They're all a bunch of honey badgers.
So did the book have a? See, the thing that I didn't like about the book is like when I read a book, I want to read like a narrative of these people that are in the whole book. This felt like a collection of unconnected stories. Do they connect?
That's yes. Well, they connect in that they're telling the story of the zombie war,
but not characters.
There's no central character. So I think the reason that I'm giving this as an anti-example is because I think that a good adaptation should have the freedom to be different, but it should take the spirit of what is awesome in the original. And I think that World War Z took the idea of the original, but didn't take what was awesome in it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, well, it needs to understand the idea, like the theme. So one of the things that we kept talking about yesterday on our call was, what is this show supposed to be? Right? What is it supposed to be?
This is a totally different show, by the way.
This is a totally different show, right? This was brainstorming like blue sky ideas for a show that may or may not be on the air one day and actually had nothing to do with our existing catalog. But it's still the idea of if this show goes on the air and it's there for 8 years, we have to set that foundation from the very beginning to say, what do these characters have to stand for? What do they mean? Because if they have meaning, then the show has meaning. And if the show has meaning, then it could possibly have longevity.
You're not doing that show about me, are you?
Yes. Yes.
Damn.
We actually are.
No, but interestingly, and I don't want to give any detail at all on this because it's so fresh, Clay, but it is based on something real. And that's an interesting
adaptation. That's true. There is adaptation there to talk about.
Right. And it's such that there is a real life person who I couldn't help. I don't know if you were doing this, Sean, because you actually know him better. I could imagine this person watching the show and people who know him watching the show and going, well, I get that this is the same thing, but also not the same thing at all. Like it's got some of the same stories, some of the same names, but not at all the same thing.
I was thinking that the whole meeting, like, okay, maybe we need to change his name, or I need to have a conversation with him to say, like, just so you know, this isn't really,
maybe.
Well, he's already on board, but I think to know specifically what is going to happen, because when you're adapting anything that's real life, now not that we have extensive experience with this, but your life doesn't always tell a real interesting story. Like life is just kind of it just happens. And so finding those nuggets and changing things, taking artistic liberties. We saw, this is actually fascinating. And I know that we're just about at time here, but I want to go into this. When we were at Austin Film Festival, we saw a script to screen panel on The Disaster Artist.
That was fantastic.
It was really, really good. And so The Disaster Artist.
So we haven't done an episode on the AFF yet, have we? We could do that next time.
No, we should do that. So The Disaster Artist is the story behind the people who made The Room, which is this like legendarily terrible movie with a decent budget, like a $5 million budget. Have you seen The Room?
No,
it's
I haven't.
Terrible, but like Birdemic, but
I was willing to do Birdemic for this show, but nothing more.
And this kid, the character who's behind it is named Tommy Wiseau, and he's just this. You can't believe this is a real person. Like he's just crazy. Like nobody knows where he's from or where his money comes
Where his
from.
money
And
comes from.
he pretends like he's 30 years old and he's got to be like 60. He wears like 5 belts at all time. Like he's just this crazy, overly dramatic guy. And in his
Is it a like Andy Kaufman situation where he's like completely punking
maybe,
everyone?
but if so,
It's
he never
possible.
goes out of character.
Yeah, it's possible.
And the Greg, I think
He is genius. Like the most genius person ever.
Greg is his friend, right? That's the guy's name.
Yeah.
So Greg and Tommy made a movie starring the two of them, and it's just terrible. And so the Disaster Artist is about that process. And so this panel, they were talking about the decisions that they made to adapt this real life story so that it would make a good story on the page. And so just one example was in real life, let's see if I get this right. Greg went out to LA to try and make it in the movie business. And Tommy stayed in Tommy's apartment because Tommy has like 5 apartments because he's rich for some reason that nobody knows. And Tommy stayed back Tommy stayed back somewhere else. I don't remember where they're from. And then like a distance kind of started to grow between them before they made this movie. And the filmmakers were like, well, that's a weird arc to have them separate and then come together for the movie. He says, it makes a better story if the movie is what broke their friendship or tested their friendship. They didn't break it. And so they actually moved Tommy out with Greg. They both moved out in the movie, but they didn't in real life because it tells a better story. And many other things. All right. So Adaptations, that was fun. I could talk more about Adaptations another time.
I'm waiting for the adaptation of Worst Show Ever with Dave's very David Christmas.
We're moving into a position where maybe we could pitch that at some point, Dave.
Oh, I would love like an animated show.
Let's pitch that to our new friend.
Okay, well, we can pitch it with the sitcom guy or the reality show guy.
Both. That's right. Yeah. We're having lunch with him next week. All right, perfect, all right. Dave. Your life will be a. Imagine signing Dave's life rights. He would never.
He would never sign that. Are you kidding?
Actually, no, he probably would because you can't give your phone company, but you can put pictures of your kid on the website and sign away your life rights.
I bet you that if they offered Dave $1 million for his life rights, he'd be too paranoid to take the deal.
Or he'd sign away his decoy life.
I would sell my soul. No.
Dave's been building a decoy life all along so that if this ever happens.
Yes.
Wow. Well,
all right, everybody. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Adios.